In May 1945, just days after Germany's surrender, an American military photographer entered a newly liberated prisoner of war camp in Bavaria and documented the moments of freedom for hundreds of Allied POWs who had survived years of captivity. Among the dozens of photographs taken that day was one that seemed to capture a moment of quiet reflection. It showed a single American airman, identifiable by the remnants of his flight jacket, standing at the camp's barbed wire fence with both hands gripping the wire, his head bowed, his body turned slightly away from the camera. The composition suggested farewell, a man taking one last look at the place that had held him prisoner, perhaps saying goodbye to the nightmare before beginning his journey home. The photograph was beautiful in its simplicity and emotion. It was filed in military archives with the notation, "Liberated American POW, Camp 7A Moosburg, May 1st, 1945. Subject photographed at perimeter fence shortly after liberation." For nearly 80 years, the photograph remained in archives, occasionally used in books and documentaries about POW liberation. But in January 2024, a military historian researching casualty records from the liberation period made a disturbing discovery. The man in that photograph never went home. He died less than 24 hours after the photo was taken. And when investigators looked closer at the image, they realized what they were seeing wasn't a farewell to captivity. It was a man in the final hours of his life, holding on to a fence because his body was already failing. This is the story of that photograph, that soldier, and the tragic reality hidden in what seemed like a hopeful image. Stalag 7, near Moosburg, Bavaria, was one of the largest prisoner of war camps in Germany, holding over 76,000 Allied prisoners by the time American force liberated it on April 29, 1945. The camp housed primarily American, British, French, and Soviet POWs, many of whom had been captured during the later years of the war. The U.S. 14th Armored Division liberated the camp after a brief firefight with remaining German guards. When American forces entered Stalag 7A, they found the prisoners in various states of health, some relatively well, others critically ill from malnutrition, disease, and untreated injuries. Lieutenant James Morrison, a U.S. Army photographer attached to the 14th Armored Division, was assigned to document the liberation. His photographs would serve multiple purposes: military records, war crimes evidence, public information, and historical documentation. Morrison spent 2 days at Stalag 7A from April 30th through May 1st, photographing the liberated prisoners, the camp conditions, the distribution of food and medical supplies, and the emotional moments of freedom after years of captivity. On May 1st, 1945, Morrison was walking along the camp's perimeter, photographing sections of the fence and guard towers, when he noticed a single American soldier standing at the barbed wire fence about 50 yards away. The man was gripping the wire with both hands, his head bowed forward, his body language suggesting either exhaustion or deep emotion. Morrison approached and took several photographs. The soldier didn't acknowledge the photographer, didn't turn, didn't seem to notice he was being photographed. Morrison later wrote in his field journal, May 1st, 1945, approximately 1400 hours. Photographed American airman at perimeter fence. Subject appeared to be saying goodbye to the camp, or perhaps processing his emotions. Did not want to disturb his private moment, so I photographed from a respectful distance and moved on. The photograph Morrison captured showed the soldier from a slight angle, about 10 to 15 feet away. The man was wearing what remained of a U.S. Army Air Force flight jacket, tattered, faded, but still identifiable. His trousers were ill-fitting and worn, His head was bowed forward, face not visible, both hands gripping the barbed wire fence at shoulder height. His posture suggested he was leaning slightly into the fence, as if using it for support. The barbed wire stretched across the frame, the guard towers visible in the distant background. The photograph was compositionally striking, the human figure against the geometric pattern of the fence, the bowed head suggesting reflection or prayer, the sense of a final moment before departure. It seemed to capture the complex emotions of liberation, relief, grief for lost time, perhaps remembrance of those who didn't survive. Morrison's photograph was processed and filed in the Army Signal Corps archives with the notation, "Liberated American POW, Stalag 7A, May 1st, 1945. Airman at perimeter fence, after liberation. Name unknown." The photograph appeared occasionally in books about World War II Ws, usually with captions describing it as showing a moment of reflection, or a prisoner's farewell to captivity, or the emotions of liberation. It became a somewhat iconic image representing the complex feelings of freed prisoners. For nearly 80 years, no one knew who the soldier in the photograph was, or that he was dead within 24 hours of the moment captured in the image. In January 2024, Dr. Robert Hansen, a military historian at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, was researching a specific aspect of POW liberation: casualties among liberated prisoners in the days and weeks immediately following their release from camps. "We often think of liberation as the end of the story," Dr. Hansen explained. "The prisoners are freed, they go home, they recover. But the reality was more complicated. Many prisoners were so severely weakened by malnutrition, disease, and untreated medical conditions that they died even after liberation, sometimes within days of being freed. These deaths are often overlooked in historical narratives." Dr. Hansen was compiling a database of American POWs who died between April 1945 and June 1945, after liberation, but before they could be repatriated. He was cross-referencing casualty reports, medical records, burial records, and photographic documentation. While reviewing photographs from the Stalag 7A liberation, Dr. Hansen came across Lieutenant Morrison's image of the soldier at the fence. Like many others before him, he assumed it showed a moment of reflection or farewell. But something about the soldier's posture caught his attention. Having studied numerous photographs of severely ill POWs, Dr. Hansen noticed that the man's grip on the fence seemed less like he was holding it for emotional reasons and more like he was holding it for physical support. The way his head was bowed, the slight forward lean, it reminded Dr. Hansen of photographs showing prisoners who were too weak to stand without support. Dr. Hansen examined the photograph more carefully under magnification. He noticed additional details. The soldier's hands appeared to be gripping the wire very tightly, with visible tension in his fingers. His shoulders were hunched forward. His stance suggested his legs might be struggling to support his weight. On a hunch, Dr. Hansen checked casualty records for American airmen who died at or shortly after the Stalag 7A liberation. The records showed 8 American Air Force personnel who died between April 29th and May 5th, 1945, at Stalag 7A or in field hospitals immediately after the camp's liberation. One entry caught his attention. Second Lieutenant David Miller, U.S. Army Air Force, age 24, died May 2nd, 1945, at Field Hospital near Moosburg, Germany. Cause: acute heart failure, secondary to severe malnutrition and pneumonia. Time of death: 8:15 hours. Subject had been liberated from Stalag 7A on April 29, 1945, but was found to be in critical condition. Transferred to Field Hospital May 1st, 1945. Evening. Died following morning, despite medical intervention. Dr. Hansen noted the timeline. Miller was found in critical condition and transferred to a field hospital on the evening of May 1st, the same day Morrison had photographed the soldier at the fence at approximately 1400 hours, 2 p.m. Was it possible that Morrison's photograph showed David Miller just hours before he collapsed and was taken to the hospital where he died the next morning? Dr. Hansen needed to find out if Miller matched the physical description visible in the photograph, and if there was any way to definitively identify the soldier in the image. Dr. Hansen began researching Second Lieutenant David Miller's military service record. Miller had been a B-17 bomber pilot shot down over Germany in October 1943. He had survived the crash, but was captured by German forces and spent 18 months as a POW, first at Stalag Luft 3, then transferred to Stalag 7A in early 1945 as Allied forces advanced and camps were evacuated. Miller's physical description from his service record matched what was visible in the photograph. Height approximately 5 feet 10 inches, medium build, pre-capture weight 165 pounds, brown hair. His file noted he was wearing his flight jacket when shot down and had been allowed to keep it throughout his captivity. Dr. Hansen found additional documentation, medical reports from the field hospital where Miller died. The reports provided crucial details about his condition when he arrived at the hospital on the evening of May 1st, 1945. Patient: Second Lieutenant David Miller, USAAF. Admitted: May 1st, 1945, 19:30 hours. Condition: critical. Patient was found collapsed at liberated POW camp. Stalag 7. A late afternoon. Witnesses reported he had been standing at camp perimeter fence and suddenly collapsed. Patient conscious, but extremely weak. Physical examination reveals severe emaciation. Estimated current weight 105 pounds. Normal weight 165 pounds. Evidence of advanced malnutrition, dehydration, pneumonia with severe respiratory distress. Heart rate irregular. Blood pressure dangerously low. Patient reports feeling increasingly weak throughout the day, experiencing chest pain and difficulty breathing for several hours prior to collapse. Prognosis: grave. Immediate treatment: IV fluids, oxygen, warmth, antibiotics. The timing aligned perfectly. Morrison photographed the soldier at the fence at approximately 1400 hours, 2 p.m. Miller reported feeling increasingly weak and experiencing chest pain for several hours before his collapse in the late afternoon. The photograph had captured Miller not in a moment of reflection, but in the hours when his body was actively failing, experiencing chest pain, struggling to breathe, holding the fence because he was too weak to stand unsupported. Dr. Hansen found one more piece of evidence that confirmed the identification. Among Miller's personal effects, which had been returned to his family after his death, was a small journal he had kept during his captivity. The journal had been donated to the Army Heritage Center by Miller's nephew in 2018 as part of a family collection. The final entry in Miller's journal was dated April 30th, 1945, the day after liberation. "We are free. American tanks came yesterday. I can hardly believe it, but I feel so weak, can barely walk. Many of the men are sick. The doctors say some of us are too sick, that liberation came too late. I'm trying to stay strong, but my chest hurts, and I can't catch my breath. I went to the fence today to look at the guard towers one last time, to try to understand that we're really free. I had to hold the fence to keep from falling. I'm scared. After surviving so long, will I die now that we're free? The entry was heartbreaking. Miller knew he was dying. When he went to the fence on May 1st, the day Morrison photographed him, he wasn't saying goodbye to captivity. He was struggling to stay on his feet, holding the fence for physical support, fighting to survive just a few more hours. He lost that fight early the next morning. Dr. Hansen consulted with Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a physician who specialized in historical medicine and the physiology of starvation and recovery. He wanted to understand exactly what was happening to David Miller's body in the hours before his death, and why liberation hadn't saved him. Dr. Reynolds examined the medical reports from Miller's hospitalization and explained the physiological progression when the human body is subjected to severe malnutrition over extended periods. In Miller's case, 18 months of inadequate nutrition. As a POW, multiple organ systems begin to fail. The body consumes its own tissue for energy, starting with fat stores and then moving to muscle tissue. Eventually, even cardiac muscle is affected. Miller had lost approximately 36% of his body weight, dropping from 165 pounds to 105 pounds. At that level of weight loss, Dr. Reynolds explained, the heart muscle itself has been damaged. The heart becomes weakened and struggles to pump effectively. Additionally, severe malnutrition causes electrolyte imbalances that affect heart rhythm. The combination of weakened cardiac muscle and electrical dysfunction creates a high risk of sudden cardiac failure. The pneumonia Miller was suffering from added additional stress to his already compromised system. Pneumonia requires significant energy for the immune system to fight the infection, Dr. Reynolds said. A healthy body can usually manage this, but a body that's already at the edge of survival often can't handle the additional burden. The infection accelerates the decline. Dr. Reynolds explained what Miller was likely experiencing in the hours before his collapse. The chest pain he reported was probably cardiac pain, his weakened heart struggling to maintain function. The difficulty breathing was a combination of pneumonia and cardiac dysfunction. His body was in the process of complete cardiovascular collapse. He was experiencing progressive heart failure in real time. Looking at the photograph, Dr. Reynolds identified specific clinical signs visible in Miller's posture. The way he's leaning into the fence suggests orthostatic instability. He's struggling to maintain blood pressure when standing upright. The tight grip on the wire indicates he's using the fence as essential support. The bowed head position might actually be an attempt to reduce the cardiovascular work required to pump blood to his brain. Every aspect of his posture in this photograph shows a body in extremis. Dr. Hansen asked the crucial question, could he have been saved if he'd received medical attention earlier that day, when the photograph was taken? Dr. Reynolds paused before answering. Possibly, but unlikely. By the time this photograph was taken, he was already in advanced heart failure. The medical facilities available in a field hospital in May 1945 were limited. They had basic antibiotics, IV fluids, oxygen, but no advanced cardiac support. With modern medical technology, ICU care, cardiac monitoring, advanced medications, he might have had a chance. But with 1945 technology, once a severely malnourished patient went into cardiac failure, there was very little that could be done. She continued, the tragedy is that Miller survived 18 months of captivity, survived until liberation, and then died because the damage to his body was too extensive to reverse. Liberation came just days or weeks too late for hundreds of POWs like him. Their bodies had been pushed beyond the point of recovery, Dr. Hansen wanted to contact David Miller's family, both to inform them of his findings and to learn more about Miller's life and how his death had affected those who loved him. Miller had never married and had no children, but Dr. Hansen located Miller's great-niece, Jennifer Thompson, age 42. Living in Ohio, she was the granddaughter of Miller's sister, Catherine. Dr. Hansen contacted Jennifer in February 2024 and explained his research. He sent her the photograph and told her what it actually showed. Not a moment of peaceful reflection, but her great-uncle in the final hours of his life, holding a fence to keep from collapsing. Jennifer agreed to speak with Dr. Hansen and share what she knew about her great-uncle's story. They met via video call in March 2024. "I never knew Uncle David," Jennifer explained. "He died 17 years before I was born, but my grandmother, his sister Catherine, talked about him often. She said his death was the defining tragedy of her life. Not that he died in the war, but that he died after the war was over, after he'd been freed. She said it felt like a cruel joke. He survived so long, and then died just when he should have been safe." Jennifer shared family letters that had been preserved. Catherine had written to a friend in June 1945. 2 months after David's death, "We received the telegram that David was liberated on April 29th. We were overjoyed, planning his homecoming, imagining his return." Then, 3 days later, another telegram arrived. David had died in a military hospital in Germany. They said his heart failed, that he was too weak, that the months of starvation had damaged him beyond repair. How can someone survive being shot down, survive 18 months in a prison camp, survive until liberation, and then die? It doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem fair. Jennifer explained how David's death had affected the family for generations. "My grandmother never really got over it. She kept his photograph on her dresser until she died in 2003. She would tell us stories about him, what he was like as a boy, how excited he was to become a pilot, his letters from training. But she always ended with the same thing. He almost made it. He almost came home." That phrase haunted her. Dr. Hansen showed Jennifer the medical records and explained what the photograph actually documented. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, tears visible in her eyes. "So when this photograph was taken," she said slowly, "he was already dying. He was holding that fence because he was too weak to stand on his own. He knew what was happening to him. His journal shows he knew, and nobody helped him. Nobody realized how critical his condition was." Dr. Hansen explained that thousands of prisoners at liberation appeared weak and ill. Medical personnel were overwhelmed and often couldn't identify which prisoners were in immediate life-threatening danger versus those who would recover with rest and food. "I understand that intellectually," Jennifer said. "But emotionally, it's hard. To know he was standing there, dying, and someone photographed him instead of getting him help." She paused, then continued, "But I'm also grateful this photograph exists. For 80 years, we thought he died peacefully in a hospital. Now we know the truth. He fought to stay alive until the very end. He was standing at that fence, holding on, trying to survive just a little longer. That takes courage. I want people to know that about him." Dr. Hansen completed his research and published his findings in the journal Military Medicine in April 2024. The article, titled "Liberation's Hidden Casualties: Post-Liberation Mortality Among American POWs, April-June 1945, used David Miller's case as a detailed example of the medical crisis facing severely malnourished prisoners at liberation. The article included the photograph, Miller's medical records, excerpts from his journal, and analysis of his physiological decline. Dr. Hansen wrote, "This photograph has been misinterpreted for nearly 80 years as showing a moment of reflection or farewell. In reality, it documents the final hours of a young man dying from the accumulated damage of 18 months of malnutrition and untreated illness." Second Lieutenant David Miller is not saying goodbye to captivity in this image. He is holding a fence because his body can no longer support its own weight. He will collapse within hours and die the following morning. This photograph is not about liberation. It is about the cruel reality that for some prisoners, liberation came too late. The article documented that of the approximately 76,000 prisoners liberated from Stalag 7A in late April 1945, at least 215 died within the first 2 weeks after liberation, despite medical intervention. Most died from cardiac failure, pneumonia, or other complications of severe malnutrition. Their bodies had been damaged beyond the point where 1945-era medicine could save them. Dr. Hansen's research sparked renewed interest in post-liberation POW casualties, a topic that had received relatively little historical attention. Several historians began researching similar cases at other liberated camps. The photograph was featured in a documentary titled "Liberation's Cost: The Prisoners Who Didn't Come Home," which aired on PBS in June 2024. The documentary included interviews with Dr. Hansen, medical experts, and Jennifer Thompson, who shared her family's story. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum requested permission to include the photograph in their POW exhibition, displayed with full context. The caption reads, "Second Lieutenant David Miller, U.S. Army Air Force, photographed at Stalag 7A, Bavaria, May 1, 1945. 2 days after liberation, Lieutenant Miller, age 24, had been a POW for 18 months following the shooting down of his B-17 bomber in October 1943. This photograph, long interpreted as showing a moment of peaceful reflection, actually documents Miller in the final hours of his life. He is gripping the barbed wire fence for physical support, his body weakened to the point of imminent collapse from severe malnutrition and pneumonia. Miller collapsed later that afternoon and was transferred to a field hospital, where he died of cardiac failure early the next morning, May 2, 1945. His death, along with those of hundreds of other liberated POWs in the weeks following Germany's surrender, reminds us that liberation did not guarantee survival. For many prisoners, the damage to their bodies was too severe to reverse. Miller survived 18 months of captivity, but died just 3 days after liberation, a tragedy that his family described as a cruel joke of fate. This photograph stands as testimony to those prisoners who survived until freedom, but for whom freedom came too late. Next to the photograph hangs an image of David Miller from 1942, before his deployment, young, healthy, smiling in his new pilot's uniform, full of life and hope. The contrast between the two images is heartbreaking. Jennifer Thompson attended the museum exhibition opening in July 2024. She stood before her great-uncle's photograph for a long time, then said to a reporter, "For my whole life, I've been told that Uncle David died shortly after liberation. It was always presented as almost peaceful, like he was freed and then passed away. Now I know the truth. He died fighting. He was standing at that fence, holding on, trying to survive just one more day. He didn't get to come home, but at least now people will know he fought until the very end. That matters to our family. His story matters." Dr. Hansen reflected on the project in an interview. "This photograph teaches us to look more carefully at historical images. What seems obvious at first glance, a man reflecting on his liberation, turns out to be something entirely different when you understand the context. David Miller wasn't saying goodbye to his past in this photograph. He was holding on to his present, trying desperately to reach his future. He didn't make it. But his photograph reminds us that liberation was not the end of the story for many prisoners. It was the beginning of a different kind of battle, a medical battle that many lost. This is David Miller's story. A young pilot who survived being shot down, survived 18 months of captivity, survived until liberation, and then died 3 days later because his body had been damaged beyond repair. His photograph, misunderstood for 80 years, finally tells his true story. Not a farewell, but a final stand.